Hello, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Great. Well, I'm super excited to be here with y'all today. My name is Ayana Bodie. I'm a senior associate with Project Drawdown. I'm just going to quickly introduce the next panel for y'all. As some of you may know, the mission of Project Drawdown is to help the world achieve drawdown, which is this future moment in time when the levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere stop climbing and start to steadily decline, thereby stopping catastrophic climate change. And the goal is to do this as quickly and safely, as equitably as possible. Now, luckily, we have all the solutions to reach this future moment in time. Project Drawdown has actually thoroughly researched almost 100 solutions to the climate crisis that, if were scaled today, could reach drawdown by mid-century. Now, our job is just to get those solutions out into the world. So I think that traditionally we've probably thought of governments and big businesses as really leaders in this space, but I think it's probably clear to all of us today here in this room that we really need some new leaders to really step up and really help the world achieve drawdown. And I think that the live events industry is a really great example of this new type of bold leadership to help the world get to that point. When you think about things like concerts and sporting events, these things have a lot of reach and influence and a lot of cultural relevance really on all of us here today. And so I think the industry is in a really exciting opportunity space to make a really big impact on climate action, on emissions, in a lot of different unique ways. So with that, I'm super excited to toss it over to this next panel who, you'll see some really great faces on it, but Cassie Lee will be moderating. Cassie is the CEO of Sound Future, which is this really awesome organization doing great work in this space. So please welcome them to the stage.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cassie Lee. I'm CEO of Sound Future. We are a nonprofit organization that connects climate technology with the live event industry. And so I'm incredibly proud today to have this panel of folks. We want to do is we just really want to share the kind of conversations that we have behind closed doors. We all want to be part of the change. We want to be a positive influence in this, what can be a pretty depressing conversation around our climate change and the crisis that we're facing. And so we've come together to really talk about how our different roles can contribute positively to this conversation, how we can make both influential leadership decisions as well as bring forward technology that can really empower the rest of the planet. And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce my colleagues and friends here today. We have Erik Distler, who is the Vice President and Head of Sustainability for AEG Worldwide. We have Sofi Armenakian, who is the Head of Sustainability for State Farm Arena and the Atlanta Hawks. We have Colin Wilson, who had 11 years playing in the NHL and is now a climate tech investor. And we have Wesley Schultz, who is the lead singer of the Lumineers and an extraordinary voice for positive social change. And so together, we want to just talk to you a little bit about the roles that we all have that we get to play in trying to move the needle forward. So I'll start with a question, and this question is a good one, I think, because when you get involved in the climate conversation, it can actually be very risky. We've seen a lot of people come forward to use their platform to share their thoughts and to be a vocal advocate for change. And sometimes that backfires. We don't have all the answers. We don't always know the right thing to say, but just being a part of that conversation can be a risk. And so as we look at the professional expertise that Erik and Sofi bring to the table, as well as a little bit of a different perspective from Wes and Colin as they use their platform and their voice for change, why join in this conversation at all? I'll start with you, Erik.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. Thank you to Sound Future and to Project Drawdown and to these event for having us. I'm excited for this conversation, and it's it's interesting that you sort of why be here, right? We talked a little bit about, kind of in our prep, this notion of risk, right? There's a risk to having conversations, about climate change, about climate science, about sort of the work that we're doing in this space, and it's an interesting sort of lever point when I think about sort of these traditional value drivers for sustainability, right? One of those is traditionally this risk management and risk mitigation component, right? So do this work so that there is a safety net or safety that you can create around your organization in the way in which you're managing environmental compliance and other forms of regulatory risk. I also think, kind of maybe apropos to this conversation here, is there's the risk of sort of the things you do, the risk of our business, our industries, balanced with the risk of not doing, right? Not talking, not speaking, not getting out there. I think that second sort of area of, and this is your brand component, the license, the social license to operate, sort of this risk of, what if we aren't having this conversation, right? What if we aren't out there trying to be bold, authentic and transparent, but try to be bold? So I see it more as, probably more as an opportunity, right? And when we think about sort of this power of what we call AEG, of live events, I think these conversations are important because they're about real action, and they'll ultimately inspire others as well as our organizations to continue to move forward.
Great. Sophie?
Yes, thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this amazing panel. Definitely one of the coolest panels I've ever been a part of. I think with a lot of risk comes also a lot of reward, right? It takes innovators of us in this space to take risk to move forward. And it is challenging, and it's not easy to do so, but we have to start somewhere. We have a saying where, and it's not ours, but it's very applicable in being sustainable, is version 7 will always be better than version 1. Just get started, start somewhere, and then continue innovating. You can't have sustainability without innovation, so you have to be willing to take risk if you want to see a different outcome.
I love that, and you're known for taking risks. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Colin?
Yeah, thank you for having me as well. This is very exciting. I think, I want to be part of the conversation, just kind of what you touched on in the introduction, was that it can be a depressing issue. And for somebody that just was very curious in this space from the beginning, the more I looked at conversation, people talking about it, it took a very complex issue and began refining it. And I think that the more we talk about it, there's people touching this from different perspectives, and I think that complex issue seems to be more of a path forward, and that's what I found for myself, and I think for a public who's also quite anxious about this, as we kind of set that path forward through conversation of people doing different things. I think we can all be a little bit more optimistic. You and I spoke on the phone one time, like, oh, are you optimistic about this? And I think the more I hear people talk, and people a lot smarter than me, the more I actually get optimistic about this. So happy to be here.
Oh, fantastic, thank you. And Wes?
Well, thank you for having me here, and I'm here because, first of all, we're friends, so that's an end. It's nice to know a rocket scientist. But I think as an entertainer and part of this sort of traveling circus where we build a small town and then break it down every day, and you see all the waste that goes into that. From if I walk out of the venue and go to where the buses are, they're running, and things like that, where you're like, I think we're gonna look back on this and say that was a weird time, So trying to be a part of making it more efficient without having the shows suffer for it is a huge concern, because, as a musician, but also an entertainer, you want to give the best show possible. So you don't want to hear that you can't do certain things. It's not about that. So trying to have our cake and eat it too, I think, is the goal, is to sort of optimize how we're burning through all this energy to put on these shows and work more smartly than we're currently doing without taking away these shows. I think that's a dream of mine, and also for fans at shows, you see all the piles of garbage at the end of a show if you're watching the breakdown, and there's that as well. So just trying to clean it up in small ways without having a fan lose that great show that maybe they felt, changed their life. So a lot of it is just that, and also feeling like, I've heard conversations between you and my wife a lot as you're working on this project, and the idea of, you're like, these aluminum cups mean one thing, and then it's the other. You're always learning on the fly, like, what's the best way to go forward, and it seems to change a lot. So I'm here to try to learn how we do this better, because it's really confusing coming into this. You feel like such a novice.
Yeah, you're not the only one confused. I mean, and I think as we look across the opportunities to improve this industry and be thought leaders and be technology leaders and move people forward in that way, I think we don't want to lose sight of what you were saying, which is this concept of gathering. And gathering should do good and can do good. And that's actually the vision statement for Sound Future, is a world where gathering does good, because it's such an important element of our culture. It's an important way that we create a collective memory and how we start to represent ourselves. And we want to maintain the authenticity of those experiences and not have it detracted because we're going into some direction that, is trying to push us in a good climate decision. We want it to actually all be one thing. And so, as we think about, everyone's role, and I loved all of your answers so far. And I want to ask one more question, and then I just want to dive into a conversation. Again, things that we actually talk about, I want to just sort of share with this panel, so hopefully we can start even bigger, broader conversations. So as we think about a world where gathering does good and the role that you have and the contributions you can make, how do you think what you can do can push us in that potential future? And we'll start with Erik.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so I work for an organization called AEG, and, we are in the music and sports business and also in the ticketing business. So, our organization is quite diverse and quite unique across the different operating units. And so, I think it's important, the team that I work with, and we're based out of Los Angeles, I mean, we are the sustainability team, right? It's in my title, it's in my job description, but it doesn't happen with me. I don't do it. And I know that sort of maybe simplifies it, but it actually happens on the ground in our venues. The GMs that run our music venues, the ops staff that is putting on our festivals, the tours that we take around the world, and all the work we do in our sports venues and otherwise. So, I mean, the power of, we see the power and the energy that's in a venue to watch Wes and his colleagues perform, to watch Colin and his teammates perform, and we know that energy is powerful and can be harnessed, and there's an opportunity to communicate to those kind of in the front of the house, as we say, right, about these issues, engaging them in a meaningful way. I think that's the responsibility of doing this work in sports and entertainment. But I often start with kind of what I started this point with, which is, how do we give credit to and focus on and celebrate those behind the scenes, BOH, back of the house, that are really doing all the work and are, the true sustainability leaders and champions. And so I think of kind of two gathering sets. I think the team that's gathering behind everything and just moving waste bins and pulling bags and sorting waste and really trying to replace, all incandescent and, ancient halogen lights into LEDs and all the stuff that I often doesn't get stated or experienced or maybe unsung. So I think, got multiple sets of stakeholders that we're always working with and managing, but there's a massive gathering behind it all. And I think, that's sort of the engine that makes it happen. So, I mean, I'm inspired by, both what we can do to speak to fans and consumers, as well as how we can engage our staff. And so that's, I think, part of the role that is important in the work that we do in our space.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. Your role, as you said, it oversees elements of music, elements of sports, other elements of other live events. You have venues, there are tours, there are all kinds of things that are coming together. And so, there's not one definition of good, but there can be things that we can learn among all of those different ways of operating and bringing the gatherings forward. And what I love is Sofi is I would love for you to tell a little bit about what you've done with State Farm Arena and how you have been that risk taker and how that's paid off and how your fans and your teams have reacted to that.
Absolutely. Before I get into that, just by a show of hands, anyone here been to a live sporting event or a concert ever before?
Been to one?
Yeah, I think we're all part of the solution, right? Erik said it so well, like we have a platform that's so cool, it's so influential, and we're all a part of it. So it's really important to be really inclusive and share a clear goal. And with that regard, for us at State Farm Arena, becoming the world's first venue that operates zero waste was quite an undertaking, but it's one that would not have been possible.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you. It would not have been possible to accomplish if it wasn't for the collective of everyone working together, truly collaborating as one team, whether it is the back of house or whether it is that amazing artists come into our venue who care and our stars have aligned and now we get to do what we do all the time, but with a team that truly cares about that as well. So I think the importance is you have to simplify things if you want buy-in. Don't make it complicated. Don't use large jargon that's difficult to really understand. It is not complicated to do the right thing. And I think we need to take a step back and reassess what we have going on and just really continue working together and making it really easy and practical. Meet people where they are, and I think that's how we continue moving forward. We're proud to have our green bubble. We consistently divert 90% of everything that comes into our building. Taking a moment and to realize we did that for a whole year in order to get this certification, and we continue doing so. But our green bubble is only a green bubble inside of our green bubble. We want to continue inspiring all of you who live in your communities that come into our venue, and hopefully we inspire you to think twice about something that you're going to do when you're not in our green bubble. So I think we're all part of the solution, and just perspective really matters there.
That is super exciting, and I want to talk about that a little bit more. And something that we'll talk about are, sort of metrics of value and how we can sort of redefine what good looks like. And at Sound Future, we look at three things. We look at, is it good for the environment? Is it good for the bottom line? And is it good for the artist? And just to, share with our audience, because that's really our goal here today, as Wesley came up to you and said, that's a beautiful event, it's a beautiful arena. It was a pleasure to play there. I love what you are doing and the way that you then turned your, pro-climate activity into this fan engagement and really started to create memories. Can you talk a little bit about what you do just to kind of up the ante and really help people feel like they're part of what you do?
Absolutely. So we have a program called Recycle and Win. It's actually taking place in various teams across the leagues as well. So what we do is we observe fan behavior. Any one of you come to an event, say Colin walks up to a bin, it's called our zero waste station. We're very considerate about the way everything is set up, setting fans up for success. He gets ready to toss his recycling bin into the recycling can into the recycling bin, and he does it correctly, completely on his own. Me or one of my zero waste ambassadors happens to observe that. So we'll walk up and say, hey, thanks so much for playing green, we really appreciate that. Maybe we'll give him a hat. It's unisex, it's reusable. We want to be very intentional about what our reward is to really try to change behavior. Because we're talking about the Southeast, where we do not have the infrastructure. It's not the norm to do the right thing when it comes to recycling. So activations like that are really cool. So for the Lumineers, we got to partner with Brandy and everyone. And we had 20 floor wristbands, 20 signed posters for every single member of the band. And reusable Nalgene bottles. And what we did was we went up to the 200 section. We started observing behavior. Can you imagine being that fan here to see an amazing show, expecting to sit up there, and then next thing, not that any seat is a bad seat in our house. And then you get rewarded to go down on the floor because you just got seen recycling. I mean, the reactions and the experience, again, that doesn't necessarily change the world, but it definitely is a way to engage and activate and kind of gamify to do the right thing. And so we did that with Roger Waters as well in partnership with AG. So it's something that we try to implement all the time, and it's really nice when the reward is something like a floor wristband.
Awesome. That's super exciting. And yeah, it's reinforcing good behavior. And it's helping, bring that, some incentive to that. And I think one thing that, we'll want to talk about in a minute here really is this concept about incentivizing positive change. I mean, this is a high influence industry, and what are you going to do, when you have that platform to inspire change? And that's why I really like Colin's story. And so, Colin, as a retired NHL player, was interested in investing in climate tech. And it was that curiosity that turned him from sort of a passive investor into somebody who takes a real position in action in that, using, the platform that he has to start having bigger, broader conversations about that. So you want to tell us a little bit about how you got into that?
Yeah, I definitely felt as though, like what Wes was describing and being a novice, I definitely was a lay person with a tendency to obsess over things, but I got into it just by doing, essentially voting with my wallet, as many people do, trying to do electric cars, recycle, things like that. And then I also learned of the effective altruism movement, which is donating 10% of your paycheck towards charities. And that's where I learned, where your dollar goes, trying to figure out where your dollar will go the furthest, where it's being used the most, where it'll go to a company, whether it's supporting policy, research grants, something of that nature. And I became fascinated with that topic. I enjoyed, choosing things like GFI.org, which was, an organization that's trying to, meat cultivation, plant protein. It covers climate change, preventing the next pandemic, antibiotic resistance in our meat. So that was an easy one. Climate Air Task Force. Another very good one, but within the scope of trying to see where my dollar goes the furthest, I began moving towards equities, which isn't necessarily, not the most sacrificial thing ever, but in talking about carrots and sticks, to begin to, in the smallest way, incentivize a market, which is based on profit, is based on capitalism, obviously, maybe part, how much to blame for what we're going through right now is through that, but using that same system to properly incentivize funds going to the right direction, and other companies pay attention to that. And I also believe in doing as much research as I have, which is probably still less than other people, but I think it, the tech, what we need to solve this climate problem is tech, and it has to, to want to do something is obviously amazing, but we are in the decade where we have to properly direct funds into the right people's hands, and I think getting it to technologies, that are looking to decarbonize cement, carbon capture, grid resiliency, these are the problems that we actually have to solve. So I took that route, dollar going the furthest, kind of carrots and sticks, and that's kind of my position that I'm at right now.
I love that. We're talking about small individual action, with Sofi's example, and now we're talking about really big action, right? Voting with your dollar, being out and engaging in policy and having those really hard conversations and really trying to fund the things that are going to be the big step function, game-changing kind of technologies. And I think that there's a lot in between those different things. And so I think maybe let's put a pin in that, because I'd love to kind of come back and talk about that entire value chain of how this industry can really move it forward. But Wes, want to definitely give you a chance to also share with us, what you think folks that are in your position can and should be doing, or how they might be able to leverage that into moving us into a more positive future.
Yeah, there's a weird way to start it, but just follow me here. It's like
Loves analogy.
my brother, he was a vegan and then he was a pescatarian, and he would tell me these stories about, he'd go out to dinner with people he didn't know, and they'd say, does anybody have any food allergies? And he would say, this is what I am. And then the waiter would leave, and people at the table, some of them would be like, so do you wear leather shoes? Or it was this very he made them feel defensive by being a vegan or a pescatarian. And I feel like there's a stigma attached to caring about the environment or climate change. It's like removing the stigma is important to me without preaching. There was a time when everybody would litter on the highway, and now that's that would be weird to do. We changed the stigma. It took time, and I think as artists, I think I cringe a little bit when you see somebody maybe use it as a bully pulpit, their stage. Ironically, we're sitting here talking to you guys. But I just mean treating the audience with the dignity and respect that they deserve so that they can be that change is really important, and maybe leading by example in small ways, having people discover, the sacrifices that you're making as a band, and that maybe they would be more willing to do that, versus there are instances where we've been approached to say, hey, you can up your ticket price by X amount of dollars, and then the fans will sort of pay for the thing that you want done. And I was always like, that's kind of weird. Why would I charge this guy $1 more? Why don't we just make $1 less? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the idea is if you can do that and do it over time, I think people will see that you're trying, and then they're willing to try. But if it's I want to see this change, but I'd like you to do it first, it's never going to work. So trying to do that without feeling like it's making the other people defensive, and it's tricky, but just trying to find a way to do that, because it sort of reminds me of Thanksgiving dinner or something. There are going to be relatives that don't agree with you, and you kind of have to get through that conversation in one piece, or else they're going to get further back in their corner. I'm just trying to figure out different ways to keep that going, so that maybe they're open to the change that we all here, I think, want, but not everybody feels like they want.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I want to open this up to the rest of the panel, just kind of for a true conversation now. And thank you so much for all of your answers. And Wes, you touched on another element of culture, right? We talked about culture and how we create it by gathering and coming together and celebrating the things that you and Colin do, and the athletes and the artists that are represented, through AEG and certainly the Atlanta Hawks. But the whole concept of like what's normal, like how do we normalize good behavior, and we create it in a place where it's not you up at a microphone saying like, hey guys, there's no plastic straws here because I don't believe in plastic straws, and one day somebody catches you with a plastic straw because you have little kids and just life, and now all of a sudden it's completely undermined your vision, right? It's about how we just start to make that change. And I think, Sofi, you were the one that was talking about incremental change. So I just would love to explore that idea of incremental change versus how we create and live the behavior that we want to sort of create as a new normalized culture around climate and live events.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, really love that you said that. Shaming people is going to make people less likely to want to be a part of what you're doing. We all know there's a real crisis. We all know we need to take action. But in order to take action and make the move go in the right direction, we really need to partner up and collaborate and truly meet people where they are. I think it's important to start thinking about how do we shift the traditional way of thinking. The pandemic added a lot of complexities to everything that all of us were doing. Can you imagine being in a venue where you have a lot of things, because of the experience, readily accessible and available? For example, condiment stands that you can go up to and get as much ketchup and mustard or whatever have you that you want. Things like that we had to go away from because of frequent touch points. So now we had to reintroduce individual packets. So now you had individual condiment packet, ketchup, mustard, all of that. And because we're all about our fan experience and we continue to deliver the best experience in our venue, we want to ensure that every fan is taken care of. So can you imagine someone who works in food and beverage? They mean well, Erik walks up, I work at the concession, he gets a burger, and I want to make sure this fan's taken care of. I go in here, grab a handful of condiment packets, put it into the bag with his burger, and hand it over to him. That's so wasteful. And I think, I don't want to shame that person who's going above and beyond and probably thinks is doing something really good, right? I think it's really important to pause and assess every space and every scenario and figure out how do we reduce. It's really simple. It's one clear step, and that gets buy-in. And now this customizes your solution, but we all have the same solution, whether it's being more efficient in how we go about reducing our carbon emissions, or how do we not send materials to a landfill. We're all about being true to our community. And in Atlanta, we know we have a lot of work to do, but we walk our talk and we talk our walk. We're transparent. We know there's much more to be done, but that's done by collaborating with our partners, everyone here and outside of here, and it's really working together. I think it might seem ignorant or, feel like, oh, you're too optimistic, but it's working for us. We've went from 10% to 90% in less than 2 years. So I think, it's possible for that to be multiplied and continue happening in other spaces.
Yeah, just to jump in, I love this conversation around kind of finding that one thing you can do, right? Sort of celebrating, taking that incremental step. And I think too often, and being honest and transparent about it, I think too often there's, sort of loud voices on the edges that draw circles around, themselves and point fingers and say, we are the ones that care, you don't care, shame on you. And I think I think we can do this work in a way where we're very real about the issues. We're very, focused on, understanding and communicating sort of why we're doing this work, but do it in a way where we're taking those individual incremental steps in a way that inspires others, right? And I think it comes down to being transparent. It comes down to being honest. One of the approaches we're taking at AEG is to talk about the journey that we're on, right? And we strive to be here, and here is in the future, and here is this place by 2050 and 2040 and 2030. And as you'd all imagine, we write a sustainability report. We set, public-facing goals that are science-based aligned, and waste goals and water goals, and have a whole strategy around that. But it's, I think it's communicating that, but it's also talking about, hey, we're not perfect. We haven't figured it all out, and we're trying different initiatives and programs all across our organization, and some aren't going to work in terms of either being able to scale them, or maybe sort of the environmental assessment of that versus the other option just doesn't weigh out. But I think it's important that we do that, and we actually tell the audience, the consumers, our fans, our artists, our athletes, that, hey, we're on this journey. We're right here in the journey. We're trying to get to all the way over here. We're not perfect. What we can commit to do, what we should commit to do, is communicating to you as we move on this journey and why we're along the way. And I think you can hold us accountable to ensuring that we're being transparent, we're actually making progress. So I think that's, sort of the sentiment that we're trying to give off in our program. And then also, I think it's important to make this work fun, right? I mean, it's hard work. I mean, I think about, sort of the origins of the sports greening movement. If those of you who've sort of followed the sports and sustainability space over the last 20 years, I mean, some of the pioneers are in this room. Literally, there's people in this room that kind of birthed and started this whole space. And they'll tell you that we just started in one place. We started in one place and brought people along the way and tried to make it engaging and fun. There's a time for, and all the conversation always needs to be serious, but at least in this industry, I think we need to have the opportunity, but frankly, the responsibility to bring people along and make it inspiring and make it a little bit more engaging than maybe you may find sort of in the news on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I love, you guys represent, and this was something that, when we started Sound Future, we came in with this idea of, okay, where are there opportunities to elevate the people that have been in the space? And, we came in through the perspective of the artist, the musician, and very quickly, started to realize that the venues themselves were obviously stationary platforms that we're going to see anywhere from 100 to 300 events a year. So, while going to an event, everyone raise their hand for a concert or a sporting event, it's ephemeral for us. You go one time, you have this experience and you leave, but what you forget is that not only is everyone else that you've shared that experience with having the same imprint that you are, but that's happening, time after time in terms of, up to the tune of about 300 events a year for some of the really large venue spaces. And so that felt like a really interesting place to scale. And it's also, with the venues, is a really interesting intersection of music and sports and all kinds of other live events that, again, help us create a culture. So I guess my question is, we've talked a little bit about the venue elements, and again, those are great and those scale. When it comes to those that are on the road, and Colin, I'm thinking back to your 11 years in the NHL, and Wesley constantly on tour, what are things that can be done either from the venue side or the fan side or the industry side that would make that more energizing for you to be a part of the conversation? What would incentivize other people to be like you and take a stage and have this kind of conversation? I'm throwing this one at you cold, so feel free to take a minute.
Well, I remember I don't know if you were on the tour of I think it was an international venue that shall remain nameless, but they said they were zero waste, and then when you guys prodded about what that meant, they said, we clean up all the garbage every day. And that was for real. And I was like, it's kind of like when you go to the supermarket and something says organic, and now we kind of don't know what that means anymore in some cases. Or I don't know, it's a big word that gets thrown around, and it's amazing to hear actual venues doing it, but like standardizing it would be exciting, like to say like there's an actual like lead kind of standard measurement that we can all hold accountable, different bands or venues, and then the bands could get, like the sanitation score at a restaurant. It's like, the Lumineers get a B+ this year. It's like, damn, let's get that. So that would be, I think, it would motivate. We like, as human beings, to score things and, and like, just like, we want to do better. My brother was driving his Prius, and he said, like, I'm like, what's with that leaf thing? Or whatever it was, and he's like, it's gamification. I'm like, what does that mean? And he's like, well, human beings just like to, like, try to win this thing. So I was like, well, what do you get when you win? He's like, nothing. You won. But I guess that had nothing to do with your question. I just had that run through my head. I think for me, you were saying what I think we can do better. Is that what you were asking, or?
Sure, whatever.
Or you
having a conversation.
Just going with that? Okay.
A real conversation.
No, I guess like I don't really. Part of it is confusing because being on the road, it's really kind of inefficient by nature. So you're trying to like cut as many corners as you can without feeling like insane, you know, for your little green room to have a certain thing that you like and it makes you feel like home and you don't go crazy and you have a better show. It's like these weird things, but trying to find the places where you don't really need that and you're wasting that the whole time. And also, like I was saying earlier, the bus is running all the time when they could be plugged in to the venue. That really doesn't happen as much as it could. But there's a whole lot. Like, it's hard to know exactly where to begin. And in a way, part of what we've talked about a lot is I study this little corner of music, and I do that, and I think I know things about that. But beyond that, I'm kind of like limited. There's like, when you become really focused on something, you're ignorant of almost everything else, you know? So I think I'm trying to turn to people who are equally obsessed with that thing and, you know, in good faith say like, what can I do? Because there's a lot of us that are asking that, but we were told 10 years ago that tote bags were a good idea, and now you got to use it like 20,000 times or something to justify it. So it's like confusing when you feel like you're trying to do good and it backfires. You're like, oh, that was silly.
Yeah,
you know?
you're a regular consumer, and I think that's actually a call to action for everyone here in the audience, right? Like, this industry has such high influence, and there's a lot that can be done. Just we still have yet to define what good looks like. And so, you know, I think everyone that's come out, every band or nonprofit or organization that said, you know, or team that's like, you know, we do this, you know, we create these spaces, we offer this technology, we are part of the solution. Sometimes those solutions aren't actually, you know, based in science, and it's like all good intent has been seen as good up to this point. And I think that maybe what we're talking about here is that this industry could really serve to grow. And I think, you know, again, to go back to the venues, there's some pretty strict standards and expectations of how good can manifest in those places, and you have the, you know, certifications and you have the requirements. And I think the live events industry, especially from the artists and the touring side, has been, you know, unstructured in terms of providing good support in terms of, okay, choose the things that either fit the ethos of your band, your tour, your fans, and choose and elevate those things and live those things, and know that those things have been vetted through science and that those things actually do have, you know, have that contribution, because you are consumers just like the rest of us.
Well, and the artist demands are really important for the roles that Sofi and I are in. And I think there's this sort of meeting together that's starting to happen where, you know, artists will show up and they'll have requirements, you know, there's in the contracts, writers, whatever it might be. And we're also creating those on our end. And I know you've got that sort of, that set up in your venue as well. So the conversation that happens between, and sometimes it's hard to get all the way to West, right? Because there's, you know, there's many layers or promoters and there's connections all the way through. But what's happening is the artists and the preferences and the demands of the artists are being sort of met with what we are expecting of artists and others and shows and events that come through our venues. And I think that conversation, I think one, it's actually starting to illuminate and say, oh wow, you know, that may not be possible in this city because of local infrastructure, but this thing over here is possible now that we had this conversation. Let's figure out how we can do it. And then I think the other space that we're looking at, and it probably is less so on the artist side, but more so on the sports side, on the athlete side, is how do we communicate that to the fans, you know, during the game, whether it's a timeout or it's during a break or whatever it might be. So there's that, there's the work we're doing, and then there's talking about it in a way that, again, is engaging. So I think ultimately, this education and awareness building focus is, I think, where we want to start. Let's educate and build awareness on what we're doing and what the issues are, and then build will from there and drive action from there. But it's interesting to see that, and you're probably seeing the same thing, right, Sofi, in terms of, I don't know if it's a sit down necessarily, but a conversation that's happening on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. There are some fans who require us to share what we do prior to them arriving or included in the rider, what they expect from us. And it's always nice to see that. It's like, yes, like you said, we love to show off. We're in a very competitive industry who doesn't, you know, want to be a leader. And with that comes doing a lot of things and learning from it. You know, when we first began our journey to become zero waste, which I like that story about zero waste. I have a funny one as well. I won't name the organization, but a couple of years ago we were talking about hosting this really large event to be zero waste. And with all seriousness, I was asked, but Sofi, people have to go to the bathroom. It's like, yes, they do. Let's define it. So I think it's good to like break it down, you know, explain it, make it make sense. But, you know, we were on a journey to become zero waste, but now it's a forever journey. There is no finish line. You know, we're going to continue figuring out this 2.0 of what we've done. And to your point, in order to do that, you have to continue having those conversations, making sure that there's stakeholders who are going to either make this result easier or more difficult are a part of the conversation. You know, include people. You'll hear some amazing ideas. One thing that my former director of engineering colleague thought of, you know, going back to operating during the pandemic, we had a seating manifest where you could only sit, you know, so many seats had to be open, and then you could sit here and then open again. You know, we were starting to get back into the event swing of things. In order to prevent people from sitting there, we had to zip tie the seats. Those zip ties were about this long, 40 cents a zip tie. So it adds up very quickly. And so what we thought of, which it was all kudos to him, and this talks about collaboration, is we figured out how to cut that zip tie at an angle to still have a second use out of that zip tie for when we needed a shorter one. So I think there's ways we can get creative. You know, it doesn't stop us from doing that, but we reassess that and we collaborate together and we figure out how to come up with a solution that reduces or reuses it. You know, again, really simple. We just have to apply it and be with intent when we do. So yeah.
Yeah, and I want to give Colin a chance to weigh in on this. We get so much enthusiasm up here.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was talking to Wes about, you know, stopping flying in the green M&Ms from Paris that he likes for his shows. No, I think as a consumer, this is where I go, or like even as an athlete, you know, like I was on a private jet. We had to get to our plane. It's an 82-game schedule. Okay, well, I can't, you know, you can only plant some, while I agree with planting trees, you can't offset that enough through just planting trees. I obviously support reforesting and everything like that, but through doing different tote bags, you know, all these different thoughts, that's where I came to research that we do need to decarbonize and get costs down. I mean, to kind of embrace that humans don't want their electric bill up, we can't just start, you know, telling them, well, you have to use this certain type of electricity. We're going to have to get volume up, you know, scale it, get the price down. I mean, you know, things of that nature. So I just believe that, you know, you can do a lot as a consumer and voting with your wallet, as I said before. But I do believe the problem solving will be in tech, because no matter what, we still have to turn the lights on. You still have to take your trip. You still have to get to your venue and getting the correct technology so that no longer leaves such a crazy carbon footprint is going to be the task of the next decade to 2 decades.
Yeah, and I think there's such a cool opportunity, and we've talked a lot about the culture side, but just to touch on the tech side, which is really where my heart lies, is, you know, I think that there's great things that we can use at the venues to try things out, to leverage, you know, the short stints that, you know, musician has. Is that something that, you know, if we could try something out with that, and then, you know, something we can grow and amplify as part of the infrastructure at a venue, I think there's technology opportunities there. And then, of course, with touring, I think we can start to crystallize a community and a demand signal around the folks of influence in these industries. Perhaps we can start to bring forward technology even faster that maybe solves what we sort of think as, you know, as problems for this industry, but I think really have uses far and beyond that. So it's, you know, I love that kind of opportunity to live out that display of, you know, making good choices, making the right choices. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to continue that journey to help figure out what good choices can look like. And so the more that y'all learn and how we might apply that to live events, I think this group is particularly keen to learn more about those things. Any final thoughts here?
I mean, I have 30 seconds, right?
Yeah.
Countdown. I mean, I think just to say that I'm just really inspired by all the work that's happening in this space. I mean, I wanted to mention it, you know, earlier when Sofi was talking about her program, but we talked about inspiring our fans, inspiring others, but we get inspired internally by what others are doing. This work is competitive, you know, sports and music, just like any industry is, but it's also incredibly collaborative, and it's replicable, right? What happens at one festival or one venue or one event, can happen elsewhere, and we all talk, we all know each other. We've been close friends for quite some time, and I would tell you, we're in meetings now going, how do we learn from Sofi, and how do we sort of go on that journey as well? So it's inspiring to sort of to follow in your lead, and also our biggest sort of culture makers and voices that can really propel this work forward are represented by the two gentlemen at the end, our athletes and our entertainers. So it's my job to create a position and a place for them to use their platform to drive change.
Awesome. Well, I think with our final seconds here, just to say, we care, we're interested, we'd love to engage with those that feel like they have solutions that we can bring forward. And again, I'm Cassie Lee from Sound Future. Thank you so much, our panel. Thank you to the Drawdown and the Nest Summit for helping us create this conversation with all of you. So thank you all for being here.
Thanks, guys.